I'd be more excited, Carmen, but I'm in the office today.
Oh, okay.
And that's not against this call. This call will be fine, but I've got a bunch of other stuff for my law practice that I have to catch up on.
A little bit of catch up. I understand. So here. Were you my courier on the way back again, Justin? With one package? Or was that last week?
So here's the thing. I got the basket.
Okay.
But I did not get anything delivered to my room for another package.
Okay. I'll call the Ramcoda. Okay. Well, it's 10:01. So in the interest of time, I think we'll get started with this. If you're ready, Justin.
Yep.
Welcome, everybody, to our first of 3 legislative updates with our lobbyist, Justin Smith. And so with that, I'll let you take it away, Justin.
Sounds good. Good morning, everybody. So it has been a very fast and furious session. There are a huge number of bills that have already been filed. I think we're up to about 440. The last I looked, last year, the total number of bills was 489. I'm pretty confident that we will pass that number this year. Starting out the first couple of weeks, I didn't think we'd reach 489, but now I'm pretty sure we're going to. So we'll see. There's a lot of, I don't care where you fall in the political spectrum, there's a lot of colossally bad legislation that has been filed. but you know, it is what it is, I suppose. Yeah, we're at 449 right now for substantive bills, and then there's a bunch of resolutions, commemorations, etc. So I'm just going to jump right into the spreadsheet that Carmen sent out. I say this every year, but the TCSD owes a lot of, you have a fantastic exec, and Carmen, her work is excellent and makes my job easier. So appreciate everything she does. House Bill 1037 would have exempted active duty members of the armed forces and veterans from paying the fishing license fees in South Dakota. TCSD had originally decided that we would, potentially support this legislation to support our veterans. However, GF&P came to me in the hallways and said, "Hey, we're going to strongly oppose this. We understand and appreciate veterans as well, but every one of these, exceptions chips away at the amount of money that's coming in to GF&P to take care of our beautiful facilities." So that bill, we were neutral on it. It was defeated 11-2 in its first committee hearing. House Bill 1047 would make an appropriation for construction costs at the Blue Dog State Fish Hatchery. I was at the committee hearing earlier this week before the Joint Committee on Appropriations. I got to learn a lot about the Blue Dog State Fish Hatchery, and I testified at the end of that hearing in favor of the bill. And it's hugely important. I think the GF&P described this hatchery as the leading place where GF&P produces walleye. And considering the number of walleye that I have caught and consumed in South Dakota, I was all too happy to get up in favor of this bill. So the bill came out of that committee unanimously. No problems with that one. Similarly, House Bill 1052 comes from GF&P as well. This would take the Spearfish Canyon Museum facilities, including a hydroelectric dam, to power that facility. It would transfer that out of state government, out of GF&P, and to the private Spearfish Canyon Foundation for future management, ownership, monitoring. This is particularly important and timely because they need a lot of maintenance at that building and updates to that building. And now the Spearfish Canyon Foundation, which has done a lot of fundraising for this express purpose, will be able to, what's the word? They'll be able to fast track that work. That bill also had no problems, had a huge line of proponents in both the House and the Senate committee hearings. It's not expected to have any problems well supported by the whole legislature. House Bill 1058 is a bill related to pari-mutuel wagering pools. This is an issue which makes it onto our tracker every time similar bills are filed. It has to do with the regulation of that kind of pari-mutuels, horse racing and dog racing, and it makes it on there because it does attract some tourism related visitors or whatnot, but we are monitoring this bill. It's now passed the House, really doesn't have much by way of resistance. House Bill 1061 is a bill that would have required that all businesses in South Dakota accept cash. The similar bill was filed last year. This bill is coming from a place of a group of South Dakotans who fear us moving to a cashless society. And the proponents of the bill did provide examples of some businesses in South Dakota that have stopped accepting cash, and the business community, including me, the Sioux Falls Chamber, one of my other clients, strongly opposes those bills. We think this should be free market decisions, and the bill was for the second year in a row defeated in its first committee hearing in House Commerce. Similar to that, it's not on this list, but HCR 6004 was a resolution that said we, the legislature, encourage South Dakotans to use cash, to know the dangers of using credit cards and blockchain and all the rest of it. Here again, the Sioux Falls Chamber opposed that one. It was defeated in the Senate, on the Senate floor this week after passing the House. House Bill 1070, we don't need to talk about for too long. It would have changed the rules related to sale of fireworks and licensure of fireworks retailers for the sale of fireworks. It was withdrawn by the prime sponsor, likely because for the second year in a row, the prime sponsor did not check with Department of Public Safety, or perhaps more importantly, any of the fireworks retailers in South Dakota, none of whom were asking for this change. House Bill 1071 would have established a 10-year registration period for boats. Same sponsor as House Bill 1070. Here again, the prime sponsor of the bill believed that this was important, that there are people who, can't afford to pay every year to re-register their boats or whatnot, did not check with DMV or state government. The bill was defeated 9-1 in its first committee hearing. House Bills 1074 and 1075. Carmen, you can update your list. These have both been withdrawn by the prime sponsor, Al Norstrup. These were the first one, 1074, would have put in place a requirement, or permission for a county which issues a tax increment finance district, a TIF, to collect out of the proceeds of the TIF its administrative costs for administering the TIF district. The second bill, House Bill 1075, would add new requirements for notice to any property owners in a TIF district before the TIF is created. Representative Norstrup was informed that both of these items are already part of the law and they're already an option for counties, and so he promptly withdrew both of those bills. House Bill 1093 would create small batch alcohol licenses. We already have created over the last 5-6 years new licensure and registration for cideries, distilleries, and wineries in South Dakota. Home brewing of those things. This bill would create similar small batch licenses for distilleries, cideries, and wineries that produce small amounts. Maybe 10,000 gallons or less of these products. Right now it's going to be before the House Commerce Committee. Not much is known about it, and we haven't received any feedback on it. House Bill 1122 is one that TCSD firmly opposes. It's similar to Senate Bill 16, which was filed and withdrawn before the session ever began. House Bill 1122 would require the licensure of fishing guides and provide a penalty if you are a fishing guide in South Dakota without having one of these licenses. I talked to GFMP about this one, and Senate Bill 160, and GFMP was formulating its position as of earlier this week. They don't They have a lot of concerns with the way these are drafted and the fact that they're short on details and just basically tell GFMP, we want you to license and regulate, but you figure out how you're going to do it. We'll see, but I know for now, TCSD is firmly opposed. I'm going to skip to 160 and then I'll come back to where I left off. 160 is the same thing. Here again, we want you to have to license fishing guides. My guess is that on both 1122 and 160, they are limiting it for now to fishing guides because Senate Bill 16 and the bill last year that would have required licensure of guides was both fishing and hunting. And what that does is it draws in a whole huge group of other opponents in the form of outdoor outfitter organizations and hunting lodges. They hate and that additional licensure and regulation requirement. I think they hope as a start with 160 and 1122 to go after fishing guides. Carmen's recommended, and I join her in recommending that TCSD also oppose 160. So I did have a chance this week to talk with a fellow lobbyist in the halls of the Capitol whose husband is a full-time fishing guide. It's what he does for a living. And he's a South Dakota-based fishing guide, but he does believe that it could be helpful for there to be some kind of licensure requirements. At the very least, he's concerned that the good guys like him who get a sales tax license from the state of South Dakota, pay their sales tax dutifully, but then there's all of these out-of-state fishing guides that come here, offer fish guiding services, but don't ever, just accept cash, don't ever get their, right, sorry, Brian, don't ever have to then pay their sales tax to the state of South Dakota. They, that these fishing guides here in South Dakota believe that's unfair. To Brian's point, this is definitely more of a Department of Revenue issue. And I'm not saying that we should support any of these bills. I think the point is, if bills like 1122 and 160 are something that's going to be proposed, going to be considered by the legislature, then it should be part of a much broader discussion and not something that's just filed with no input from the actual boots on the ground people. And so I did have one of the proponents of 160 come up to me in the halls. I think it's the Isaac Walton League. Their lobbyist came up to me and said, do you know if TCSD is going to take a position? I said, we are opposing 1122. We're still deciding on 160. I suspect that we'll be opposed to both of those. And I gave him some of our reasons and said, these are being dropped without any of the stakeholders or organizations being brought into the discussion. So we'll see. I don't expect either of these bills, 1122 or 160, to gain much traction, especially since none of the stakeholders were consulted, but that's where things stand. Before I move on from 1122 and 160, is there any questions or comments from the group about those?
Are you hearing any rumblings that there might be another bill coming in? Because I heard that 160 was getting some rewrites on it.
Oh, I'm confident it'll get rewrites.
Okay.
They're going to try and amend the bill to address some of the concerns before they ever have their first hearing. But no, I'm not hearing about any other bills being filed right now.
You want a fishing guide's perspective?
Sure.
So as it said, it's a Department of Revenue and Secretary of State issue because they don't communicate. There's zero cross-reference. Anybody can have any business. So as a business that many on here understand, you register with the Secretary of State. Has absolutely nothing to do with your sales tax license. You pay $100 annual fee, file your annual report, which benefits that business as a fishing guide. Absolutely zero. Does absolutely nothing for you. So if you don't pay that, it doesn't. If you can look up, you're going to find like Mike Allen and me are probably the only two registered guides with the Secretary of State out of the 100. So when you call the Department of Revenue and they say, well, you owe sales tax, I'm like, but over here you tell me I'm not a business, so I don't owe you nothing. So they don't communicate. So to the point of the other guide, I agree there should be some type of regulation that minimizes the people that aren't doing it properly. Because there's plenty of them. I know guys that have got it for years, and I brought it up, and they said, "Well, I've never paid sales tax." I was like, "Oh, well, according to 1991 statute, you owe a lot of back taxes." You know, and then they delete all their comments and disappear. Because then the general public doesn't realize that fishing guides pay sale and tourism tax. So as tourism knows, that's a lot of money from several of us. And we don't like the people coming from out of state not paying it. And I don't care that they come from out of state at all, but just $30-$50 registration fee to GF&P, so, or just the State Department, so that there's a list of registered guides that the Department of Revenue can cross-reference is really all they need. And the stupid reporting every week is ridiculous. Like you said, the stakeholders haven't been communicated with. So the first question is, what are you trying to achieve?
Exactly.
You know, everybody's like, well, it's just a money grab. Well, that's what all of this, everything is. Everything's about money, period. Everything's a money grab.
No, and consider, I mean, you're right, Brian, and considering the source, some of these organizations like Isaac Walton League and whatnot, I mean, I think right there at the beginning, in my mind, that makes the bills, automatically suspicious right from the get-go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm fully opposed, but to your point, if the target here, which it's not, by the way, if the target here is to make sure that these guides are paying sales tax, or making sure that everybody has the same government obligations or tax obligations, then this is a huge overshoot for trying to hit that narrow target. So it's clear that's clearly not the motivation here. Otherwise, it would have been something I suspect the state would have brought instead of these organizations.
And just to reiterate, some of the recommendations, I know there's a lot of Cracker Barrels coming up tomorrow. And I've had some people reach out to me, and my comment to them has been, to their legislators, that they do need to talk to the stakeholders, and they do need to talk to other areas, saying, instead of just launching legislation like this, yes, they need to spend some time this summer talking to the people that they're affecting to get the real feedback that they need from those people who do it professionally, and then work with GF&P as well, just to come up with a better solution and a better bill. And Brian, that sounds like it needs to go back to the Secretary of State as well as Revenue. So yeah, there's a number of players that they need to bring into the mix before they launch legislation like this. So,
and I told them the exact same thing last year, which you just pointed out, that they're not talking to the stakeholders in the bill. And here we are again, not a single person's asked any of these fishing guides their opinion, because they think that we're all against it, which isn't true. The reality is that most of the public doesn't know that what is due. The legit ones like myself have $1 million liability policies. Not a problem. The first aid stuff doesn't bother me. I'm a combat vet certified and everything. It doesn't matter. But yeah, that'll filter out some. They also don't realize that none of these are coastal waterways, so a captain's license isn't required. That's a federal requirement on, the Mississippi River in certain aspects, or a Great Lake, because they're coastal waterways. The Missouri River is not a navigable water, so it doesn't matter. And having a 6-pack license, what it's called, doesn't do anybody any good. So all the stuff they're throwing at it, they don't understand, which you deal with all the time. I'm sure, Justin, of uneducated people introducing bills to fulfill constituents' obligations.
Without naming any names of specific legislators, yes, there's a lot of uneducated bills out there. Unless there's any more questions on 1122 or 160, I'll move on. House Bill 1156 would lengthen the waterfowl hunting season again for veterans and active duty military. I think my guess is GF&P will oppose this, just like they did on 1037. I think my recommendation is just like 1037 for TCSD to be neutral. I think on 1037 we were neutral, even though it says oppose here. But I mean, I'm fine if TCSD decides we would like to oppose 1156. 1157 would establish a task force for the purpose of studying aquatic invasive species, especially zebra mussels. This has been a huge issue for the last 5, 6, 7 years, and many people who frequent our lakes in South Dakota, particularly those who live on or near some of our South Dakota lakes, have been very upset with state government for not being as proactive as these folks believe they should have been. I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just telling you where this is coming from. And I think given the extreme importance to a lot of TCSD members, my recommendation would be the TCSD support 1157. Again, the goal here is let's study the issue, including hearing from other states about the possibility of controlling, eliminating, preventing the spread of these aquatic invasive species, and allow TCSD members to be involved in that discussion and to offer up their perspectives. If you talk to some people in state government, or some people who have dealt with zebra mussels and other species in other states, their claim is once it's in the lakes, it's too late. There's nothing you can do about it. You just have to grin and bear it. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just a lobbyist lawyer. I don't know anything about the science behind it, but certainly it can't hurt to study the issue and see if there's solutions that can be reached.
You want some education on that? You're going to talk about fishing. I tend to know a thing.
Go ahead.
The zebra mussels have never made a fishery worse. Lake Erie is not Lake Erie without zebra mussels, and there is no longer zebra mussels in Lake Erie. There's now cougar mussels, which are much bigger, which don't plug up certain things. It is a gigantic waste of money and time to spend any more time. Wyoming's just getting on board. Minnesota's spending an astronomical amount of money. You can't stop and prevent it. You can educate people. Secretary Roebling knows this 100%, much like care less for the guy. He understands it, and they've created a PR problem with this thing nationally.
Okay.
Mother Nature will do what it does with them, but they make every place better. Sure, there's certain issues with it. And yeah, Laura just chimed in. And Wyoming's like 10 years behind, so they're just now being a big deal because people are coming over there to fish. Educate it, hope to prevent it so it doesn't get in there, but you can drain a lake and the next day a bird can drop one in.
Okay.
I mean, you can't stop it. The only thing that can stop it is God and Mother Nature, and that's that. So they have mitigated things to help, like Gavin's Point Dam, so it can't plug up. UV lights will attract them and kill them, but they produce at such a rapid speed you can't completely eliminate it. Omaha's drains Rinsky Lake twice. Within about a 6-year period, they immediately come back. It's like trying to stop geese from being on the Capitol lawn. It ain't happening.
I mean, I do my part. I kick them every chance. No, I'm kidding. I do not do that.
I mean, you take the weeds off your trailer. It's probably the only way they're really going to get transported, but they don't stick to a boat that's driving around on the lake for a day. They can be pulled out from the trailer that grabs a hold of weeds that they're attached to, but if the boat's in a slip, if you've seen a dock get pulled up at the end of the year, their swarm, Lewis and Clark is and heavy with them, but it has just made the place that much better.
Okay. Well, so that's the question then for TCSD is, do we want to support a potential task force? I think Laura put into the chat what I've heard from some of the people who push for the task force, who push for South Dakota state government to try and take steps on the zebra mussels and other aquatic invasive species, which is we'd at least like the state to do more to raise public awareness. I don't know if and to what extent that will be part of the task force's discussion.
So I'm just talking zebra mussels. There are other invasive species that, yes, and spending $50,000 on it, like she says here, it's probably good because you figure these other states spend 18 million and $1 million, and they haven't stopped anything from happening. So you're just throwing away money, but not to disregard the other invasive species that can be. A lot of it's more vegetation related, so that you can't control.
We'll revisit this, okay?
Okay. 1195, provide free admission to state parks for residents enrolled as members of Indian tribes. Here again, my guess is that GF&P will oppose this. I think my recommendation, as with the military and veterans measures, is to stay neutral on this from TCSD standpoint. I could see arguments both ways. I mean, again, every time you chip into the income for our state parks, for our lakes, for hunting and fishing seasons and licenses, those kinds of things, it's less money that's available to keep up those incredibly important natural resources. Resolution 6003, recognizing the importance of conservation and restoration practices and water shortages for fire mitigation of the Black Hills. It's already passed the House and the Senate, so this resolution is now resolved by the legislature. Resolutions have no force of law, and they are mostly just to raise public awareness. This one we were monitoring. SB 1, Senate Bill 1, is an example of some of the bills that I'll now, I'll talk about kind of as a package. TCSD before session, and then the last week of session, last week, when we had the tourism conference going on and had the board meeting. TCSD has been considering getting involved in fights related to economic development activities and the use of economic development tools by state and local governments to try and attract businesses, attract new projects. Examples would be the Governor's Office of Economic Development's Future Fund and Ready Fund, and then local options like tax increment finance districts and BID districts, business improvement districts. This bill, Senate Bill 1, would have changed the process. Two big things it would have done. One, it would have added more members to the Governor's Board of Economic Development to consider any kinds of loans or grants or awards from the Future Fund. And two, it would have capped the interest rate for loans from that fund at 200 points. I forget what it is. But that's an example of a bill that is not directly in TCSD's wheelhouse, but TCSD and Carmen made a fantastic survey and surveyed members. So often with these economic development tools and partnerships between government and private industry, what develops is a project that ultimately results in more income for tourism related businesses and for the tourism industry generally. So, as Carmen reported from the survey results, it looks like the majority of TCSD members would support the organization taking a more active role, having a more active voice in some of these economic development related bill fights. Other examples, particularly those that got filed this week, would be Senate Bill 96, county gross receipts tax to resume. No, I'm sorry, not that one. Senate Bills 178, 191, 192, and 203. Those are 4 bills, all of which got filed this week, and all of which would make it more difficult and to do tax increment financing across the state of South Dakota. Sorry, 109, there's 5. 109, 178, 191, 192, 203. Those are 5 bills that would make it much more difficult to do TIFs in South Dakota. So giving an example, Senate Bill 76 this year. This would take money out of the Housing Infrastructure Fund, which currently has about $60 million in it, $65 million. And it would take $30 million of that and make 2 separate $15 million loans, one to the Rapid City Regional Airport and one to the Sioux Falls Regional Airport, each $15 million and each interest free. And the money would then be paid back as it's currently written to the Governor's Ready Fund. So that fund would then gain $30 million more. The bill would also ultimately sweep the remaining $35 million from the Housing Infrastructure Fund into the Governor's Ready Fund. This is being proposed by the Governor's office because, according to them, we have inadequate amounts of money in our state-level economic development coffers to compete with some of our surrounding states by way of economic development incentives. Now, there's heavy opposition to the money not being repaid to the Housing Infrastructure Fund because the business development groups, the property developers across the state, the communities across the state say, hey, that fund was set up several years ago to be able to fund workforce housing projects in communities across the state, because you can't fill jobs unless you have workforce. And the workforce moving here can't afford housing. So we're going to set up affordable housing projects across the state. This would be an option to fund that. Senate Bill 76 will almost certainly be amended to remove that money being repaid to and swept the Ready Fund. It'll stay in the Housing Infrastructure Fund most likely. But Senate Bill 76 is one of the major pieces of legislation that TCSD will be supporting this session. But it's also an example of where these state economic development tools set up money and options for opportunities that hugely impact the tourism industry in South Dakota. Rapid City and Sioux Falls airports, clearly, two of the major hubs that travelers use to get to our state. Senate Bill 16 has been withdrawn. I've already talked about it. It would have required licensure of fishing and hunting guides. Senate Bill 58 was defeated unanimously in its first committee hearing. This would have reduced the mill levies for schools, counties, and cities for property tax to 0. And then from then on, it would have had all funding of local governments, cities, counties, schools. Those decisions would have been made at the state level. It was universally hated and was defeated unanimously in its first committee. Senate Bill 64 was a bill that TCSD looked closely at when it was first filed, because the concern was it was going to make it more difficult to hold boxing or MMA events in the state of South Dakota. Ultimately, we determined that this bill is more of a regulatory cleanup bill to give the Athletic Commission clear rulemaking authority for some of these issues that surround the boxing and MMA type events, such as manager contracts for the participants in the events. So TCSD is now neutral on this bill. We're just monitoring. Senate Bill 70 would have essentially combined into the Transportation Commission the South Dakota Railroad Board and the South Dakota Aeronautics Commission. This was opposed by some folks with connections to TCSD because the concern was from Senator Joy Hone, who's a pilot, and some others, was that this would ultimately result in less emphasis on aeronautics, on airports, on pilots, and compared to railroads, which in South Dakota at least are almost entirely about commerce, not tourism travel. Air travel in South Dakota is extremely important to the tourism industry. That bill, again, was defeated in its first committee hearing. I've talked about Senate Bill 76 on the airports. Senate Bill 96 and 99 have to do with property taxes and changing the way in which property taxes are assessed and collected. Senate Bill 99, both of those ultimately had the goal, according to their prime sponsors, of trying to put in place some property tax relief. 99 was of particular note to TCSD because the solution there from Senator Jim Melhoff of Pierre was, we're going to raise the state sales tax from 4.2 to 6.2%. And all of the new money from raising that would go toward property tax relief. So all of our customers for the Tourism Coalition members would have had to pay an additional 2% in tax. In a lot of communities, which like Sioux Falls, which have decided to put their additional municipal 2 pennies, the sales tax would have gotten as high as 8.2%, not even counting for the hotels in Sioux Falls, all the bid, board, etc. fees. So it could have made this a lot more expensive for tourism-related industry. Senate bill, but that bill was defeated. So Carmen, you can update your list. That was defeated pretty overwhelmingly in its first committee hearing. Senate Bill 102 would modify the distribution of gaming revenues. Instead of that money going the first 100,000 going to the State Historic Preservation Fund, and the rest going into the general fund. This is the city of Deadwood saying, hey, we're the only city that has legal gaming in South Dakota, at least, the type of gambling. We're not counting video lottery is a different thing. This is gaming revenues. Since we're the only city, we would like to phase over 5 years that money will eventually go, instead of to the general fund, to the Deadwood Historic Preservation Commission. It's been that bill, TCSD supports it. We think that's a fair use of that money, since Deadwood is the place that has all of that gaming. And Deadwood is definitely a huge historic landmark and a big attractor for tourism in the Black Hills. That bill has been referred to the Joint Committee on Appropriations, has not yet had its first hearing. My guess is that the state of South Dakota Department of Revenue will oppose that bill, but time will tell. I know Deadwood is very firmly in favor of it. I talked about 109 when I talked about the anti-TIF legislation. Senate Bill 131 would here again revise the season in which a nonprofit organization can host a special pheasant hunt for disabled veterans. This is a very narrow strike zone bill. Even so, it does change one aspect of one season for pheasant hunting. I think, given the way the bill is drafted, it makes sense for TCSD to be neutral on it. And this is more of a veterans organization issue. We talked about 160 when we talked about registration of fishing guides. Senate Bill 135, just like a couple of others, 127, 128. These bills are targeting data centers. This, unlike the bills that deal with TIFs, the bills that are targeting data centers are much further removed, in my opinion, from the tourism industry than TIFs are, or the Future Fund or the Ready Fund. Data centers, according to one side, and in fact, I'm just going to share this one little story. I got home last night. My 17-year-old son, who was a legislative page last year, started a debate with me about data centers. And so we had a very long debate that eventually started hurting my brain, because these kinds of debates are what I do all week. But his position, and the anti-data centers folks' position, is data centers are bad for a community, bad for the state of South Dakota, because they take too much water, they use too much energy and increase utility rates, and they contribute to the growth of AI, which is a societal, which harms society. On the other side, you have a lot of the business community, perhaps particularly the utility companies, who say data centers result in more property tax income for a community, more jobs for a community, contractors' excise tax, sales tax, etc. Plus, they grow the electric utility infrastructure, and so on and so on. That's really the fight between the two sides. And similar to the CO2 pipeline last year and the year before, one group is very adamantly opposed to data centers, and one group believes that we should encourage any form of economic development, provided it's not overtly harmful to a community. So this is just my perspective. My perspective is, if TCSD is looking for an opportunity to be more engaged and involved in economic development legislative disputes, it's much more directly in TCSD's wheelhouse to get involved in the Future Fund and Ready Fund issues than the TIF fights. Obviously, the bid tax, that's above even the future fund and the ready fund, but there's probably not going to be any legislation on that this year. But if that's what you're looking for, I think you put future fund, ready fund first, TIFs second, and I don't personally view the data centers as being TCSD's issue. But if anybody in the group feels differently, I'm not going to be offended at all. I can tell you, I am already lobbying in favor of development of data centers on behalf of the Sioux Falls Chamber. But that's just my perspective, and certainly the TCSD members can talk about it among yourselves. So again, I'd call out, if you're looking at data center bills, Taffy Howard's 127 and 128. House Bill 1005, which is from Representative Kent Rowe. This is the one piece of legislation that has currently been filed in favor of data centers. House Bill 1038, which is coming from the Public Utilities Commission. And you've already got 135 on your list. So those would be the big bills that I would look at if you want to consider taking a position on data center fights. SCR 601 would have encouraged honest economic development in South Dakota. There is a similar one, HCR 6007, was identical to SCR 601. Essentially, the purpose of this, thanks, Laura. Essentially, the purpose of these measures was to say any form of government-sponsored economic development is dishonest, is not Republican. And so the chambers of commerce, the business community, the economic development professionals, all opposed both of those. They have both now been defeated. I'll close with SJR 504, which is one that has been in similar legislation has been introduced the last couple of years, going back to after the ballot was amended. Was that 4 years ago, maybe? I think the ballot was amended 4 years ago, 6 years ago, to allow sports wagering in Deadwood. Ever since then, groups have been pushing legislation that would expand sports wagering statewide, either or both through apps like DraftKings or through kiosk stations installed in licensed beverage dealer businesses. I don't think TCSD has ever taken a position one way or the other when these are in the past, but SJR 504 would say the legislature is authorized to adopt statewide sports wagering through mobile technologies, which I argue includes both kiosks and apps, statewide, but all the money that comes from the statewide sports wagering has to go toward property tax relief. The goal here is for the people who want the statewide sports wagering to put the people who want property tax relief into the difficult position of saying, well, I want property tax relief, but I hate gambling and sports wagering, so I don't want it to come from that. Again, this puts something on the ballot rather than the legislature just doing it. And I think it would all still run through Deadwood, through the Deadwood servers. So Deadwood would still be the primary source, and that's why Deadwood supports this amendment. But that's where it is. TCSD has not taken a position on these in the past. There is, certainly sports wagering in Deadwood attracts tourism for that gambling. if you expand sports wagering statewide, it is entirely possible you will draw people from neighboring states who, not Iowa, but from neighboring states that don't allow legal sports wagering to come across the border to South Dakota and place those. I think this is why the licensed beverage distributors or dealers want the kiosk model instead of the app model, because if you can just, and one of my kids has a buddy who lives just across the border on a farm near Larchwood, and when I drive him out there, I see the people who go and park right across the border into Iowa to get on their apps and then drive back to Sioux Falls. So my point here is, this would just say, if it passes on the ballot, the legislature gets to decide how statewide sports wagering is going to work. So, but if in my opinion, my perspective of TCSD, it's not going to drive much, it's not going to drive as much tourism if it's a statewide app where you can place the wagers anywhere within the borders of South Dakota, as it would if you had to go into a business and use one of the kiosks. Just my perspective, that's not an issue on SJR 504. You can, Brian, just like you can be a fishing guide, collect your money and not pay your sales tax to the state of South Dakota. You can do it in South Dakota, but it is illegal unless you do it in Deadwood. So anyway, 504 would just put it on the ballot and give the legislature the power to do it. So we can leave for another day the question of whether it should be app versus kiosk. Carmen, have I missed any bills today?
No, we added what, 10 last night.
And I talked about at least 5 of those. Oh, well, I did forget one. Senate Bill 36. This is a bill coming from the utility industry, and it would say every utility company in South Dakota has to adopt a wildfire mitigation plan, submit it to the Public Utilities Commission, and then it has to be publicly, the public has to be informed of this wildfire mitigation plan. Additionally, it is intended to limit the liability of the public utility companies for wildfires. It's not intended to tell people, hey, if your house burns down, we're not going to pay you any money. It's rather intended to say, look, these lawyers who fly from state to state every time there's a wildfire, and they bring massive lawsuits and try and collect billions of dollars. We don't want to have or encourage this trial lawyer industry in the state of South Dakota. We think there should be reasonable limits on that type of liability. It's not gonna, this bill, I don't think, is gonna increase the number of wildfires or decrease the number of wildfires. It's just intended to address these situations where the damages that could be awarded are out of control, and your local utility company or co-op or whatever is going to be bankrupt out of existence because of the damages that would be paid. So I think TCSD is looking closely at this because obviously wildfires, perhaps particularly in the Black Hills, but anywhere, wildfires are harmful to the tourism industry because people are going to travel to a place less if they know it's burned up. So Carmen and I have a call at 11:30 with Black Hills Energy to get more information on Senate Bill 36. It passed the House or the Senate committee and the Senate floor this week, yesterday. It's on its way over to the House. They're always looking for more allies to help them support. In opposition, you had the South Dakota Trial Lawyers Association and a couple of insurance interest groups. Now I think I hit all of those.
Yeah, and I'll be recapping these in our weekly recap that I'll be working on this weekend as well. So I may reach out to you for clarification on a couple of things, Justin. Does anybody have any questions for Justin? Anything to add?
We've heard that there is a potential for another aviation-related bill that's being drafted, most likely presented by Joy Hone. It will more than likely have to do with the responsibilities of the Aviation Aeronautics Commission. So something we're watching. On the small batch alcohol 1093, I spoke with several Rapid City wineries. None of them were aware of the bill, so it's not coming from this area. Both Uplifted and the Firehouse Wineries oppose it.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you, Justin. We know you still have a lot of things to do with your other job as well. And just a reminder to everybody, we will have our second one of these on February 13th, which is a Friday at 10 o'clock. And then we'll have our last one on March 6th. So if you haven't registered for that, please do. This is recorded. We'll be putting it in our newsletter as well. So with that, I think we're good.
Yep, I'll just add one more thing before we go. I think I might have talked about it at the beginning. Yesterday was the deadline for unlimited filing of bills, which is why this week we saw an avalanche. From now until Thursday of next week, each legislator is Wednesday of next week, each legislator is permitted to file an additional 3 individual bills. But every one of my 15 years of lobbying up to this point, the legislators file most of their bills before the unlimited deadline. And you see a smaller number that will file 1 to 3 bills after that deadline. And I'm really hoping that holds true because there's already enough that's been filed.
Well, we'll hope, okay?
I think my personal tracker at this point, out of 450 bills, has at least 150 bills on it. So for all my various clients. All right.
Okay.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody. Enjoy the weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin.